Hello, everybody. Let me get my screen up here so I can see all my people. And share my screen, share my screen, share. All right. And chat. Cool. Cool. Give people a minute to trickle in. Make sure I have all my stuff prepared and ready to go. I think I do. I'm gonna go here. Yeah. Who's that? All right. Groovy. All right, let me actually make sure that I put this in the channel. I forget that sometimes. Cool. All right. Howdy.
Hey.
How's it going?
It's going all right. I just wanted to peek in for a second.
Cool. So far, you're my only one.
Yeah, I'm just doing a few things at once here, but I just wanted to, I dig Angular and try to help the students out, but I saw something about modules. I was like, all right, let me check it out.
Yeah, modules are actually incredibly easy.
Yeah, everything's it's like a circle with Angular. It's like the components go to the services go back to the components, back to the HTML.
Mm-hmm.
But the modules, I guess it starts with the app component, which fuels the modules, which fuel the components, which fuel services.
Yeah, kind of a more of a way to just kind of group things together.
You're right.
Inside of a module.
Cool.
All right. Hey, Richard, how's it going?
Richard.
I have a pretty high-tech audience today.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to be able to stay for the whole thing. I don't know how long it's going to be, but
that's okay. It should be relatively short-ish. It's probably going to be my shortest workshop.
Okay.
Because it is a pretty straightforward topic. Right?
Very cool.
So then to cover this is mostly going to be the contents of lesson 6, which is Angular modules.
Gotcha.
A new Angular project here. Right. I'm going to kind of give my usual disclaimers of figuring out which version of the Angular CLI we're running. We can do that by Angular or ng:\version. Right. The CLI did recently update to version 7. Right, there are some minor differences between 6 and 7. They've changed some of the optional parameters. So find out what version you're on first. Cool. I want to make a new project. Ng new. I'm going to call this my-app. I'm going to use the fun option for skip tests. Right, this will skip generating the .spec.ts files. They kind of pollute the project a little bit if you're not using them. If you're using them, it's great, but if not, they're extra files. CLI 7 will ask us if we want routing. We're going to say no. We'll then ask us what style sheet format you want to use. We want CSS. That's probably, I think, the major visible difference between CLI 6 and 7 is that this one will ask you for a couple prompts when you make a new project, which is kind of neat. If you want a project with routing, it'll make it with routing for you.
That's awesome.
Which is pretty handy. It's good to know how to make it, but once you know how to make it, it'll add it in there for you. And of course, it's going to take a couple minutes to set up the project. But we can look in here and see that so far it has skipped a lot of those .spec.ts files. Right. There used to be a minimal flag for Angular projects. They got rid of that. And this is kind of the closest we can get to it to skip some of those spec test files. And it is doing its thing. Cool. Cool. So I have my stock app up and running. I'm gonna make sure to go into the folder for my app and start it. ng-serve /open. It'll pop open and build my Angular project. Okay, this at least makes sure that everything is up and running and nothing is broken yet. So if something is broken at this point, then something bad happened. But everything should be up and running. Cool. It popped up, has the default Angular boilerplate sitting right here, which is groovy. Cool. So what I want to do next is I'm going to open up a new terminal window and go back into my project. Cool. Clear out the terminal, go get some space. I'm going to generate some components. So I'm going to generate a component inside the main application itself. Generate component. What do I want to call this? Couples? No. I'm going to make a company component. Generate component company. We'll just say company works. I'm going to open up the main app component HTML and gut it. I want to list out my component. App company. Page should then just say company works. That's my default component I made. Company component, I get into it by app-company as the selector, and it loads up on the page. Right, that's kind of the Angular we've been working with so far. Right, making component, display it on the page. But what if I want some better grouping? What if I have a whole bunch of components all together and I want to kind of split them up a little bit? Right? That's where I can start kicking in some Angular modules. So I'm going to say ng generate module. I'm going to call this people. I'm going to make a people module. And basically this is going to create a new folder called people, and it just puts my module file inside of it. people.module.ts. This kind of acts as a mini Angular project. I can build components inside of this people module. I could say ng generate component. As long as I prefix it with people, maybe I wanted like a person list. Maybe I wanted a list of people inside of here. As long as I prefix it with my folder, it's smart enough to update all of the correct files. It's going to make my person list component inside of my people folder. And it's going to update the appropriate module inside of there for my person list component. That's pretty cool. So now I can put all sorts of components in here and they're grouped inside of this people component, people module. What if I wanted to use one of those on the page? I'm going to say app person list. Optimistically, I'm going to think that's going to work, but that is not going to work. It's going to give me an error message saying that it can't find app person list, right? Because this is going to kind of drill into how some of these components work and how some of these modules work. My people module imports the person list component, but it doesn't export it anywhere, right? It makes its own kind of internal private reference to person list component, but I don't have that person list component coming out. As well, my app module TS doesn't have a reference to my people component. I'm going to start there. I'm going to import people component, people module. Keep on calling it component. People module from /people/ module. And it's a module, so it goes with its module friends. People module. Cool. My page still has the same error message though, so I'm halfway wired up. My main app module knows where my people module is, but it still doesn't know how to reach into that component. So inside my people module, I need to have an exports array. And in here, I'm going to say it's going to export person list. As soon as I do that, my page should come back alive. Company works and person list works. Right? So as long as any other modules I create import my pieces and export my pieces, then any other module that imports this module has access to them. So there's a couple of plumbing pieces to wire up. Other than that, they're pretty straightforward. And some of those are kind of discoverable by the error messages. If the errors say that they can't find the modules or can't find the components, then we're missing a piece here or there. So as long as our main app module, which we're always going to have, knows where all the other modules are, then it'll work pretty good. I can make as many submodules as I want. Let's make another couple. Make ng generate module. I'm going to call this one, we had people, we did company. Let's make cars. I'm going to see if I can wire this up to the main app module automatically. Right. So I'm going to try to say dash dash module equals app. I believe that's going to be the option to wire this up to the main app module for me. Yeah. There we go. That wired that in there for me. Cool. So I didn't need to import this module by myself. And I can add any components inside of there, and they should work. Right, let's add another component inside of there. Let's do ng generate component cars slash, I'm going to make a car list. I like making lists. Car list. Cool. And that updated my cars module TS as well. All right. And as long as I export, exports car list component. And I should have access to that in my main app component HTML. Let's do app-car-list. Page should now say company works, person list works, and car list works, right? So what if I have more components inside of cars? I'm going to add another one. I'm going to make car form. I'm going to make a car form just for kicks. And I'm going to use that car form inside of car list component. App-car-form. Let me see what happens here. Let me see if it should still output. Car form works, right? I don't need to export that one. Kind of like as, I think that was Richard. As Richard pointed out, I can use some of these modules to either export components or not export components. Maybe nobody else should have access to app car form but this car module. Maybe I want people to pull in my whole chunks and not chunks individually. Right? This module could render a very complicated component with subcomponents, but you can only call like that main shell of it. You don't have access to all of the internal guts. Right? It should know how all the pieces wire together. It just needs to use it. Right? Modules is a great way to organize structurally our pieces of our Angular application. And we can either expose or not expose pieces of them as we see fit. And they're pretty easy to set up. All you need to do is just generate one. Typically, I'll put some sort of default component in there to make sure it's all wired up. And once it's all wired up, everything else just kind of flows pretty smooth. I can make classes in there, I can make services, I can make all the other jazz I can make with a regular Angular application, and I can make that inside of my individual modules. Right? So lesson 6. Lesson 6 in our LMS is actually pretty straightforward. Right? Modules are pretty fun. And it's mostly just organization and grouping. we can kind of see that we're also importing modules from other parts of Angular. We're importing a browser module, right? That browser module has all sorts of built-in components and stuff with it. Right? When we want to import, when we want to use two-way data binding, we bring in import forms module from @angular/forms. Just the way we would bring in our own module if we were to make forms module. That gives us access to all of the forms directives and components, which is pretty neat. So the modules that Angular has and the modules that we can make ourselves are relatively the same. I'm going to go on a limb and say that theirs are probably more complicated than anything I'm ever going to make. Mostly mine are just for grouping and structural kind of cohesiveness. But sometimes instead of having like 80 components listed on a page, even if just cosmetically we group them into modules, we can kind of make them a little bit easier to work with. So it's kind of a subgrouping part of our Angular application. All right, I have a couple other people that have joined this session, which is pretty neat. And joined just in time for basically my shortest workshop. All right, so then let's review it again. Let's go over all this again. I'm gonna start up a new application. I'm gonna go over this whole shebang again. I'm gonna do it a little bit quicker this time. Trash this guy. I'm gonna trash this guy as well. Cool, I'm gonna open up a terminal. I'm gonna go into my project folder, paste recursion. Cool, make a new Angular application again. ng new my dash app 2. Make my app 2 with a flag for skip tests, which removes the .spec.ts files. Do I want routing? No. Actually, I'm gonna do yes. Routing is one of the further lessons, but I kind of want to see what that would do if I did want routing. So if I did want routing, it's actually going to make app_routing.module.ts for me. It makes a whole new module for me. And it exports router module. And then inside of my main app module TS, it brings that in. Right? App routing module. Here it is. I highlighted the wrong one. So just like making my own custom module, it's making this app routing module for me, which is just like a normal module. This one is going to be self-contained in just the one file. But if I wanted to be more complicated, I could put it in its own folder. Maybe it had its own routing components, right? Be just the same as any other type of module. Cool. Almost there. It's like watching water boil. The longer you look at this progress bar, the slower it takes. Cool. If that showed up on the camera, it'd be thumbs down. Somebody was knocking on my door. All right. CD, my app 2. Right. So my app 2 is the application I'm in right now. I'm going to make a module, ng generate module. I'm going to call this one, I'm going to make a cat module. I'm going to say dash module equals app. And I tell it its parent module is the app module. Right? It's going to say it created src app cat module ts. And it updated src app.module ts. It made my module for me, and it wired it up to the main app module. Make another module called dog. It should do the same exact thing. And now I can build inside of these modules by prefixing the name of the component with the name of the module. ng generate component, say cat/cat_list. If I do the same thing with dog and dog list, That makes me components individually in those modules. Okay. I'm going to go into cat module TS. It has the cat list component there. And I'm going to export it. Exports is an array, not an object, of all of the things I want to export. I'm going to export cat list component and save that. I'm going to do the same thing with my dog module. Exports. An array again, not an object. Dog list component. I don't necessarily need to dig into those components to know they work. I can go into the main app component HTML. This is the main boilerplate of my application. I'm going to use my two components, app-list, app-dog list. Right. If I serve my application, ng serve --open. My application should come up, and it should say cat list works and then dog list works. As soon as it decides to pop up and build. All right. Cat list works and dog list works, right? I pulled components from two separate modules and spin them out on the page. Right? That is pretty neat. Pretty cool and pretty easy. Probably one of the easier parts of Angular, grouping and organization. Right? After that, it's all downhill for getting services and classes and components all wired up and talking to each other. But grouping into modules is pretty straightforward. Cool, cool. Any questions, concerns, comments? Hopefully I haven't been gesticulating too much. I can't see myself on my camera.
That's great info. I've seen some people actually use the folder modules, which is kind of, I guess, redundant. I don't know, like they actually put the modules in a folder called modules. But I like the way you do it. Seems more.
Yeah, either way, in a modules folder would prevent it from being confused with other components.
Yeah, I don't know.
Because if you make a, let me get into this project real quick. Like if I just make a component in my like raw application, say like frogs. Frogs is going to show up right next to cat and dog, of cat, dog, and frogs.
Right.
I don't necessarily know which one is a module and which one's a component. So I definitely can, I believe, prefix the module with a folder. Module, I'm going to say /modules. I grossly misspelled turtle. And then module equals. I think that'll group that one in a modules folder. Yeah. So as long as I prefix when I'm making my modules with the word modules, it'll group them together like that. If I wanted to move these, I certainly could. Will it let me? That did not let me. Maybe because it's running? Maybe. But yeah, so to kind of maybe avoid some confusion for what's what piece, right? It can always make everything inside of a different module to start off. You can maybe just have your core app module and everything else lives inside of your own module. So that way you know what's different between like the core Angular and then your workings and mechanisms. But yeah, kind of 50-50. Naming structure sometimes is preference.
Well, thank you for answering that.
Maybe I named them differently too. Maybe I wanted to call them by their, like give the folders a little bit better naming. Maybe instead of a modules folder, I wanted mod dash crickets. And then dash dash module equals. That's a version error there. All right. Maybe I wanted to name them. All of my modules have like mod dash. Or all my components were like com dash or something. Just depends on organization. For smaller projects, it's not too big of a deal to have a couple things kind of not specifically named together. So it's not too big of a deal to kind of drill into them. But if you have like 16 or 17 folders, then you're like, yeah, maybe I need a modules folder. Right? So it gets kind of interesting. And it just depends. Depends on the size of the project. And even if you kind of convert from one to the other, it's not the end of the world. If I stop this guy, I should be able to move my dog into my, and cat and the controls. I just need to fix some of the wiring. Like these guys won't know where they are anymore. So my main app module just needs to know where they moved to. If I make sure to do a /, everything's happy. Everything comes back to life. Right? So organization with modules is actually pretty easy, especially moving them around. If you cosmetically move them around, as long as the main app module knows where they are, put them wherever. Cool. Yeah, if you move things around into breaks, it's pretty easy to identify, right? It says, hey, I can't find this here. It'll tell you. It'll tell you real quick. And those are pretty easy to fix. Pathing is pretty easy to fix because it'll complain about those real quick. Right? Neat. Cool. Yeah, modules are pretty straightforward, pretty fun. Groovy. Personally, for me, when I make projects, I tend to only have, I don't know, if I had more than 6 or 7 components for a small scale project, I'd be surprised. So kind of grouping into this modules is more rare on smaller scale projects. But then again, it's just preference. Some people like to be extremely organized with projects. Some people are components and things all over the place, and they just magically know where things are. Right? It just depends. Cool. Cool, cool. So that, in a nutshell, is the Angular modules lesson. Right? Pretty neat and pretty straightforward. All right. Any other questions or concerns? Maybe, maybe not. All right. Cool. I will get this uploaded to our channel and our workshop list. My last workshop, I forgot to record it. I was changing some of the recording settings, so this one will go up there. I double checked and made sure. And then it'll be up there for reference. Cool. Tomorrow, I think I'm working on a workshop for something I can't remember. Maybe forms? Routing or forms, 50-50, maybe both. Cool. See everybody tomorrow.